Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today I will talk about the cardiac cycle. This topic is easy, not that hard, and the question on this topic is also easy. Simply, if you understand the basics, you will answer everything about it in the exam, inshallah. At first, I will start with simple basic principles. Okay, I will start with basic principles. The easiest thing I found to understand the cardiac cycle is to understand the electrical stimulation. يعني لما تفهم ال ECG، لما تفهم ال P wave أو ال waves in general, how they come, they will understand the mechanical event. Okay, what I mean by that is because the ECG will precedes the mechanical event, the electrical stimulation precedes the mechanical event. If you understand what's happening with the ECG, you will understand more easily the mechanical event. Okay. Second thing is the diastole. Now, what I mean by diastole is for sure relaxation, but at the same time, diastole synonymous مع الفيلينج. Okay. يعني when you hear diastole, دايما لازم think with filling. يعني when the compartment is relaxed or in diastole, meaning that it's being filled. Okay. Now, the atria and the ventricles ever contract together. Okay, what I mean by that is once the atria are contracting, the ventricles should be relaxing, and when the ventricles are contracting, the atria should be relaxing. Okay, meaning that the contraction of the atria or contraction of the ventricles will never happen together normally. Okay, إذا كان heart normal, the atria and the ventricles contract while each other is relaxing. Okay, and the atria relaxing, ventricles contract. Atria contracting, ventricles relaxed. Okay, at the same time زي ما حكينا diastole meaning filling. يعني ventricles contracting, atria relaxing, so they are filling. Atria contracting, ventricles relaxing, so they are filling. Okay. And another concept is when both valves are closed, there is no change in the volume. Okay. Now, you know each ventricle is having two valves to be guarded by, the AV valve and the aortic valve for the left ventricle, and the pulmonary valve for the right ventricle. Okay. Now, when both valves are closed, يعني لما البايكاسبيد valve والaortic valve are closed, there is no change بالvolume في الventricle. This is called isovolumic, يعني the same volume, isovolumic. Now, in other words, that means that we don't have a change in the length of the muscle fibers of the ventricle. So this is called also isometric. Okay. Now, the isometric and isotonic concepts in the skeletal muscle are easier, but here they are quite misleading. But I want you to know that when you say isovolumic, this means isometric. Okay, because there is no change within the ventricle, no change in the volume. Okay. At the same time, we have the isotonic, meaning that we have changing in the volume. Okay. Now, a small revision about the ECG. At first, we have the P wave, which is the depolarization of the atrium, and I have then the PR segment, which is the atrial contraction. At the same time, we have the AV conduction, يعني electrical potential is going from the SA node to the AV node, and you have the delay. Then I have the QRS complex, when we have ventricle depolarization, ST segment, which is the ventricular contraction, and then the T wave, when we have repolarization and the end of the action potential of the ventricles. Okay. Now, actually, this graph is illustrating every single thing in the cardiac cycle. يعني understanding this graph meaning that you understand every single part of the cardiac cycle. Now, at first, I will start within the ECG. يعني I will start with the ECG and راح أمشي مع ال ECG وراح أحكي إيش راح يصير بالheart during this period. Okay. طيب. At first, we have to orient ourselves what we are looking for. Actually, we are looking at pressure and time and volume. Okay. The pressure the pressure in the ventricle, left ventricle, namely the left atrium and the aorta, and we are looking at the volume of blood in the left ventricle. Okay. Now, this graph YN is very beautiful because it relates the ECG with the pressure at mechanical events with the volume, with the with the sounds, what happening within the heart, with what the sound are there. So actually this يعني summarizing many things. Okay, طيب. Starting with the P wave. Now once we have the P wave, I will have the atrial contraction. Okay, now the atrial depolarization, and then the PR segment we have the atrial contraction. طيب زي ما حكينا, when the atria are contracting, ventricles are relaxing. Okay, so what happens that the pressure in the atria now will increase simply because صار فينا contraction, the pressure will increase. Now the blood within the atria will tend to go to the ventricles. Okay, now دائما remember, the blood will go from high pressure to low pressure. Okay, so the blood will go from the high pressure atria to the less pressure ventricle. Okay, but as you can see, we have increase in both. Okay, because the blood, now we have contraction in the atria, the blood went to the ventricle, so both of them are increasing in a pressure. Okay, طيب. P wave and PR segment. Now this is the atria. The atria for sure will start to relax at the QRS complex. طبعا is not recorded, the atrial repolarization, and once they start to relax, QRS complex will appear. Now at the QRS complex we have the ventricular depolarization. Okay, يعني ايش? Contraction. The ventricle will start to contract. Now once the ventricle will start to contract, the pressure in the ventricle will be higher than the atrium. Okay, so what happens that the blood will love to go again from the ventricle to the atrium. Okay, because the pressure in the ventricle is higher. But we have here the AV valves, the atrioventricular valve that we have talked about here. The pressure, the blood will love to go from here to here, but because we have this valve, what happens is they will contract. Okay, they will close, and the contraction for sure by the papillary muscle, we have closure of the mitral valve. Okay, and this will produce this slight increase in the atrial pressure, because when the mitral valve contract, it will push the blood a little bit in the atrium. Okay, now so the AV valve will close and produce the first harsh sound, the lub sound. Okay, you know the harsh sound is lub dub. The first harsh sound S1, it is lub sound because of the contraction because of the closure of the AV valves. طيب الآن aortic valve is already closed and the AV valve is closed. As we said, when both valves are closed, there is no change in the volume, and we call this phase isovolumic. So بنسمي هذا الفيز isovolumic. Okay, طيب احنا فينا contraction ولا relaxation؟ Simply QRS meaning contraction. So I have isovolumic contraction phase. So what happens is there is no change in the volume. Okay, الventricular مليان blood, filled with blood, and once it contracts, the pressure will increase so much. Okay, I have very rapid increase in blood pressure. So as you can see here, within the ventricle, very rapid increase in the blood pressure. Why? Because we have contraction of the ventricle. Now once it becomes more than the aortic pressure, the aortic valve will be open now. Okay, because the pressure now is more than the aorta, and this will open the aortic valve, and the blood will rush from the ventricle to the aorta, as you can see here. Because the aorta valve is open, the ventricle and aorta تقريبا we consider them one compartment. So the pressure in both of them, I will have very slight difference لأنه الأورتا is compliance and elastic. It has a lot of compliance, so it will distend and accommodate all that blood that's coming here. Okay, and the blood will go all the way from the ventricle to the atria, to the aorta, and then to the systemic circulation. Okay, now this called the rapid ejection phase. So at first we started with isovolumic contraction, then this called the rapid ejection phase. Okay, now at the rapid ejection phase, what happens that the blood will go from the ventricle to the aorta rapidly. So as we have very decrease in the volume, as you can see here. تمام. Now as the blood go, the pressure will decrease because now there is no blood. Okay, and because of that, the blood will slow a little bit, so it's called slow ejection phase. So the ejection is two parts: the rapid, because very high pressure, and the slow. Okay, now the pressure then will start to decrease in the ventricle because most of the blood راح على الأيورتا. معظم البلد راح صار في الأيورتا، so صار فينا decrease بالبلد pressure أقل من الأيورتا، و this will cause closure of the aortic valve. Now aortic and pulmonary valve for sure. For the aortic valve, this will produce the second hard sound, S2. Okay. Now this will produce what's called the dicrotic notch. Dicrotic notch, I will explain it at the end. Okay. Now, what happens is the aortic valve is now closed, and the AV valve is closed still. So both valves are closed. So this will produce isovolumic phase. So I will have isovolumic, but because we have relaxation now of the ventricles, okay, but we said QRS complex depolarization, ST segment contraction, the ejection phase. Now at the T wave, you can say at the end or at the middle, yani, and the doctor usually consider it at the end, I will have relaxation, and this will lead to isovolumic relaxation, okay, because we have isovolumic and relaxation, so it's isovolumic relaxation phase, okay. Now here what happens is the pressure is rapidly decreasing, Now at the same time, زي ما حكينا, ventricle are contracting, atria are relaxing, so they are filled, okay. During this time, from the pulmonary veins in case of left atrium and the inferior and superior vena cava in case of right atrium, they are filled with the blood, and the pressure in there are increasing. So once the the left ventricle almost reach zero pressure, the AV valve will open, and the blood will rush from the ventricle, the atria to the ventricle. Okay. Now this blood moving is passive, yani there is no contraction. Okay, there is no contraction, so it's called isometric here. And then what we have that the blood will rush and leading to a rapid filling phase. Okay, يعني gradient is high relatively. تقريبا في atria, let's consider it +5, in the ventricle is 0. So this high pressure will cause the blood to rush to the ventricle. Okay. Now as the blood go from the atria to the ventricle, اللي بصير إنه the blood is now increasing in the ventricle, increasing the pressure, and the atria is decreasing. So we reach a point, we have now start a reduced filling, okay, because the pressure gradient decreased. وهي passive movement, passive pressure gradient, decrease بالpressure gradient, decrease بالmovement. Okay, this is a rule. So this is called reduced filling. Okay, once we reach a point, they have equilibrium. Okay, the pressure is the same and there is no blood movement. Now very important to know that 70% of the blood will go by this passive filling, by rapid and reduced. Okay, 70%. Now finally at the very end part of the diastole, the P wave will come again, and this will lead to contraction of the atria, and this 30% will go to the ventricle. Okay, and the cycle will continue. Now by this we end most of the important points. Okay, but I will discuss it in another way in order to be more understandable. Okay, we can divide the cardiac cycle for easiness for systolic part and diastolic part. Now this is according to the ventricle. Okay, ventricular diastole and ventricular diastole. Now each one of these has two parts, early and late. Okay, so early part of systole, late part of systole, early part of diastole, late part of the diastole. So at the early part of systole, I have what? I have QRS complex and I have ventricular contraction. As we said, this is called what? Isovolumic, because both are closed, both valves. So at the early systole, I have what? Isovolumic contraction and very rapid increase in the blood pressure in the ventricle. Now after that, I have the ejection phase, and at the ejection phase we have what's called the late systole. As we said, we have the ST segment and the blood is rushing, okay, is going from the ventricle to the aorta. Okay, and we have the rapid filling, the rapid ejection, and the slow ejection phase. Okay, so the systolic part is, this is the early systole when we have isovolumic contraction or isometric contraction. The pressure is rapidly increasing, there is no change in the volume, all valve are closed, and at the beginning of this early systole I have first heart sound. Then the late systole, we have rapid and slow ejection when we have a rapid decrease in the volume, okay, and the aortic valve is opened. Okay, now the relaxation at the end of the T wave, you can say it will start, and the diastole we have at the same time early diastole. Now the early diastole, the aortic valve is closed and the AV valve is closed. I will have isovolumic relaxation this time. So the systole starts with isovolumic and the diastole starts with isovolumic. What happens here? The pressure is at the beginning of this systole I have the second heart sound because the closure of the aortic valve, and I have very rapid decrease. في عندنا decrease بالبلاد pressure. Now في الليت ديستول الآن شو بصير؟ في الليت ديستول we will have the opening of the AV valve with rapid and slow filling. Okay, they are passive. So في الليت ديستول passive. إذا late distol passive filling, rapid and reduced filling. Okay. Now at the very part at the very end part called the end distol. Now at the end distol I have the atrial contraction and this 30% will be pumped. Okay, so this is called for sure isometric relaxation. Okay, isometric relaxation. Okay, يعني systole, early systole we have what? Isovolumic contraction, first heart sound, and the pressure is increasing. Then I have at the late systole filling, ejection phase. Okay, ejection phase. Then I have the diastole, early diastole I have isovolumic relaxation with the notch. Okay, I'll talk about it now. And then I have what? The late diastole with the filling and the end diastole with the contraction of the atrium. Okay, so at the P wave I have what? Atrial contraction in diastole. At the QRS complex I have what? Isovolumic contraction, early systole. At the ST segment I have what? Ejection phase. Okay, at the T wave I have the relaxation, and I have the isovolumic relaxation at the end of the T wave, and all that filling during the TPC interval. Okay, between T and P wave we have this all filling. Okay, we have the filling. So the late diastole mainly in the TP interval. Okay, and at the end of the T wave I have the early diastole. Okay, now actually I summarized this by this summarized all that by this table. At the P wave I have atrial depolarization, the mitral valve is opened, and I may have S3 and S4 sounds, but they are not very important. At the QRS I have the ventricular depolarization, mitral valve will close, and S1 with isovolumic contraction. ST segment, ventricular contraction, aortic valve will open, there is no sound normally, and except in case if we have stenosis and the valve I may have murmur. Okay, but if everything is normal there is no murmur. Now the rapid ejection and slow ejection here. Finally T wave I have ventricular relaxation, the aortic valve will close producing S2 and causing isovolumic relaxation. Okay, actually by this I covered every single important thing in the cardiac cycle. Simply just watch this video, go rapidly on the sheet. Okay, بس طلع sheets rapidly after this video, and I hope you will answer every single question in the exam. Okay, thank you.